Hi, Professor. Today I'm going to be going over my final project for BA513. I chose to answer the question of where is the most vulnerable place to contract COVID-19. And this brought up a lot of questions along the way. I'm actually currently in quarantine due to COVID-19, so this assignment was kind of ironic. Our marriage started off with getting hit by a hurricane on our honeymoon and then coming back to isolation, so hopefully that makes for a good story someday. I started with the COVID-19 vulnerability measures as my base worksheet to kind of analyze and form my final project off of. So while I was looking at that, it was really a lot of information to look at, and I just started trying to break it down. It gave me a lot of questions about what I was really looking at and what I wanted to look for. So the workbook that I had been working in did not provide me a number of the cumulative confirmed cases, but I really wanted to use that against this data to see if it was really a true representation of what areas were most vulnerable. I began to filter it to March 20th of 2020 for the cumulative date, but then I realized that I would rather focus my questions on the testing of the measuring components rather than testing how they were on March 20th. I wanted to see if it still was a good representation and still held true to the number of cases, because in the worksheet I could see that it held true with the current date. So on my worksheet I have the chart comparing the modern vulnerability index and cumulative positive cases by state. I started this by pulling the median vulnerability in each state. It derived from the weighted healthcare resource risk, social risk, and medical factor risk. I then compared these with the cumulative positive confirmed cases to date. I really didn't like the look of this chart to begin with because I thought it was very simple and plain. I really liked the colorful visuals, but after I went through the different charts, I realized that this was the easiest way to compare the states side by side while still showing every state's name and having those visuals there to compare it to. From this, it was very easy to see that there's not a significant correlation between the two factors, and that started to make me wonder why, and I found that a high vulnerability will not always have a direct correlation to a high number of positive cases. I started looking at population, and for example, Wyoming and Texas are very similar in their vulnerability measure, but Texas is almost 3 times larger as far as population count. So their cumulative number of cases is almost 112 times as many. And that's because more people automatically means more cross-contamination, more opportunities for contact, and more places to be at the same time. So I had originally performed this data set first, then I realized that the population needed to be measured as well, since that plays a huge factor in these numbers and the percentage of the vulnerability. So that moves me to my next question. Who should be worried? How do you know if it's safe where you live? Just because you see a high vulnerability measure doesn't necessarily mean you should be more worried rather than being in another state. I started this chart using the first photo that I have linked in my Word document. It was pulled from the workbook that I have linked, the COVID-19 vulnerability measures. I didn't like the look of how they had the data, and it really wasn't a good representation. And I couldn't find what I was looking for, and I really just wanted to focus on the most vulnerable areas rather than how they compared to each state. since that's what we are really concerned about with this virus. And I wanted to make something easier to visualize that really gave me more information than what this did. I started with every state, but it was really too much to be shown, and it just was not as informative as I wanted it to be, and it wasn't a good comparison. So I switched it to the top 10% from 90 to 100% vulnerability rate. And then what I kept finding was that some of the states weren't adding up, comparing their vulnerability to the number of cases. I kept finding that the number was being skewed since there is so many counties in the larger states. So I wanted something that was more accurate. So I split it into each county rather than the state. And I think this made it more accurate. For example, Warren County is a hot spot, but some other counties in Kentucky aren't. So it definitely skews it a little bit over the state. This chart gave me a better idea of the major hotspots in the country. I wanted to see a better, more detailed representation of them. I wanted to focus on the exact county it was in. I think this gives a better representation because you can see the exact zip code, county, state, the median vulnerability index, and the population. It really gives people a better idea of how much they are really vulnerable to this. A county like this one in Oregon is going to be a lot more vulnerable at that 91% across 152 people because of the possibility that there may not be as many resources there, as many hospitals, because of the small location. But over here we have North Carolina, Yancey County, and they are at a 92% on their median vulnerability index. Across 16,583 people, they are also at a very high risk because of their population, but in a different way. They could run out of hospital beds, they could run out of resources. If there's a lot more people, that means there's, there could be a lot more cross-contamination, like we talked about earlier. There's just going to be a higher number of cases in this state, and I think that's what I was really looking for. When I saw the number of cases earlier, you look down and you compare these numbers, and they look very similar right here, and then you go over here and it is nowhere near. So I was really curious to see how it would compare to each other as far as the relationship between the vulnerability and the number of cumulative confirmed cases in each state. I also added the color-coded population chart so that you can see these are less populated counties in each state, and then you get warmer with the lighter toned colors. Another thing to notice about this chart is that there are only 18 states listed, so that was very interesting to see the factors come into play again from the medical risk and the social and healthcare risk. There could be similar events going on between these two counties, or just the healthcare in the overall state. A lot of people are uninsured after they've lost their job due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was just really interesting to be able to visualize this and how important this is for the people in these counties to see this, to know how vulnerable they really are and susceptible to this virus. A lot of these states have multiple counties in them, even Kentucky. It would be really important for the people living in these areas in the zip code, county, state, to wear their mask out in public, to be prepared, to sanitize everything. because they really are very susceptible at this 90 to 100% vulnerability rate. And then lastly, I have my sources. I have the first workbook, the COVID-19 vulnerability measures, and then I have the second workbook that I pulled the cumulative confirmed cases out of. This one was actually the first one that you gave us as the starter workbook. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and thank you for a wonderful semester. Have a good day.